Modern tower defense titles come in all shapes and sizes, including roguelites, first-person, side-scrolling and more, on top of the more regular kind that we are used to, so upcoming games begins with XENOBREAKERS classic tower defense, which is, as advertised, looking similar to Kingdom Rush, in which you have buildings which spawn units that go into the lanes to fight enemies, but this time having a sci-fi theme instead and looks neat. And switching gears, our first-person title is AI.VI, in which you play as a retired mercenary robot forced into active combat again after an evil Giga corporation decided to conquer your planet and to exploit it for resources. There's quite the history behind first-person tower defense titles, going back to games like Sanctum or even Natural Selection to some extent, with the trailer showing that roguelite style choice of upgrades, but is not a roguelite as far as I can tell, and has an interesting cel-shaded look. This video is brought to you by 17 Waves TD, an online multiplayer tower defense game where the 17 colonies of a far-off planet have come under attack by alien bugs. There is a player avatar in this game, so you need to run around the map to manually gather resources, construct and upgrade towers, load them with ammo, and pick up coins from defeated enemies. The hectic energy of this game is amplified by the co-op focus made for up to 4 players. Each map has an array of paths and the various aliens may charge through, so you must plan to cover lots of ground and to strategize with different types of towers, or spend that gold in player upgrades like adding a jetpack or granting a boosted overclock power to any of your towers. While 17 Waves can be played solo with a helper drone, it is best experienced online with friends. There is a free demo available now, and the full game will be releasing later this year, so be sure to give it a wishlist. This next title is pretty blatant in the copying of the UI from Peglin, but Bumble Rumble takes roguelite pachinko and turns it into roguelite tower defense, in which you have to successfully defeat waves of enemies in the bottom half of the screen to deal damage to the enemies on top. Where I'm just curious mechanically about how this game works, if and how the constructed towers carry over, or if it is reset after every attack, but it's something different in this space. And speaking of which, I came across this next title when looking for Souls-like games, but thought that Frontier Paladin belonged here since it combines deliberate stamina-based combat with tower defense elements, where you have to defend your castle by fighting off waves of enemies. As such, it's an interesting mix of ideas and looks nice visually, where you can go into dungeons and battle enemies and use the loot and resources from there to build towers, research new technology, and strengthen your defenses, all while you rebuild a shattered paladin order and looks fantastic. With a very different looking game being Touhou Dungeon Maker, The Labyrinth of Heart, a title that I didn't see coming since it is a roguelite tower defense dungeon management RPG, resembling something like Plants vs Zombies, with the enemies advancing from right to left and your towers, aka characters, are fighting back, with the ability to strengthen your defenses, where the Steam page seems to be machine translated, so I'm not confident on the details and will be of interest to Touhou fans, but for the older gamers among you, you might be interested in this next title, since if you remember the good old days of Flash games and PopCap in particular, you might have come across the Zuma series of Match 3 titles, with the UI of Stellar Watch reminding me of that game with the way that the enemy paths are drawn, and also the fact that you can rotate your main ship at the center of the level to line up your defenses to attack the sneaking waves of enemies. It is on the more minimalist end of things in terms of presentation, but to tie the gameplay to the rotation of the ship is interesting, since you need to line it up with enemies and could require interesting strategy and synergies, which should make it a great game in this genre, with another promising title being Mini Tank Mayhem, coming to us from an Indonesian developer, and is a captivating blend of tower defense, card strategy, and roguelike elements, where you command powerful mini tanks as they defend against relentless waves of enemies. By utilizing a deck of powerful cards, outgun, strategize, and find the right combos to defeat your enemies, which will be critical when it comes to epic boss battles. the roguelite elements come in the form of unpredictable waves of enemies, so you need to adapt your strategy accordingly, having a fantastic look as well. Although my question to the developer is why the tanks cannot move, but putting that minor point aside, since it is a tower defense game after all, this looks to be of interest, as does Iron Guard Salvation, a sci-fi lane-based entry in which you are constructing and upgrading turrets to battle waves of robots, all controlled by a hostile sentient planet. The game takes place across multiple worlds which have come under attack, and I suppose being controlled by a sentient planet from far away leads to some justification as to why the enemies just follow the lanes. The game also has some RTS influence, with mention of harvesters gathering resources as well as minerals and factories, so that you have the resources to build the turrets itself. There will also be hero units and super weapons looking very pretty, and while Traptile might not look as visually stunning, I do still think there's something of interest here, since this roguelite tower defense title wants to test your engineering skills. It seems as if you are not constructing regular arrow or cannon towers, but are instead building fans and whirlwinds and lasers, having to use these effectively in combination to bounce enemies around to inflict maximum damage, with the more minimalist presentation looking neat, with another roguelite of interest being Rogue Monster Rush. A great looking isometric title that has you building out the map itself, allowing you to rotate and place entire chunks of land masses in order to shape the path that enemies have to take. However, while it seems like you can extend the path such that enemies really do have to travel quite a distance, tower defense fans will know that spreading out your defenses like this might not be ideal, since you want to create choke points and have your most powerful towers there, so this has strategic implications. Also, your towers are monsters and you are fighting robots, where organic towers are always interesting, since I think that there are less constraints around their design, along with evolving the monsters instead of upgrading the towers, and it's a decent visual style as well, and the same can be said for Islets Defense, this time leaning more in the pixel art direction, and, get this is a turn-based tower defense title which is certainly unique. You can choose between 4 actions in every turn, namely upgrade, morph, build and explore, where these actions vary in effectiveness from left to right, where using the strongest effect card on the right cycles it through back to the left, so you are encouraged to use all 4 actions. Build constructs new buildings, upgrade improves existing ones, morph transforms a plot of empty land into a forest or wheat field for extra benefits, and explore allows you to uncover the mist, with another pixel art title of interest being Bean Beasts, one that also has organic towers in the form of the different beasts, which can gain experience and evolve, adding an almost Pokemon-like monster taming element to the genre. This is an amazing style tower defense title in which you can place down walls to redirect enemies, and some of you might be glad to know that this is not a roguelite, having 40 handcrafted levels across 5 biomes, but it will have 8 endless mode maps if you want to test your strategy to the extreme. Your creatures will have special abilities and secondary attacks on top of their main one, and with 10 beasts, each with 3 stages of evolution, might have quite the variety and does look good, as does Relic Guardian Tower Defense, another title that looks similar to a Kingdom Rush title, but not all buildings are summoning units of their own, and where your character avatar is represented on screen. There's also a priestess character who can transform into various heroic forms to take the fight to enemies, where there appears to be 5 primary tower types which can be further specialized into a total of 15 different advanced spirit towers, where I would consider this to be one of the best looking games on this list, with Rift Riff having a very different visual style, but one that makes it stand out as well. This is a more freeform tower defense title without explicit lanes for enemies to move in, but does have pre-designated spots in which to build your defenses, and does have a neat minimalist art style in which the enemies do look like brown blobs. Defeating them nets you juice, which you can use to build and upgrade, where surviving a level gives you prisms, which are then used to unlock even more new worlds, towers, and upgrades, with the game designer on this being best known for Hidden Folks, which is neat, so their next game is of note, as is Kingdom Rush 5 Alliance TD Colossal Dwarfare, the latest campaign addition to a game from 2024, which is part of the long-running Kingdom Rush franchise dating all the way back to Flash Games, and developer Ironhide Game Studio is still going strong. This adds a new dwarf campaign comprising of 5 new stages, 12 new enemies, 2 mini-bosses and 3 epic bosses, along with a new tower, a new hero and more, where they have released 2 free mini-campaigns in October and December 2024, but this particular entry will be paid, but there should be at least one more free mini-campaign, so the base game plus DLC will be for fans of the genre, as should be the case for Ever Warder, a pixel art roguelite tower defense title that requires you to protect your crystal by summoning units to fight off waves of enemies and to push back the darkness. There are several strategies that might work depending on the run, whether it be to slowly and steadily build out your defenses before expanding outwards, or to aggressively push in any one direction to seek out ancient structures and powerful artifacts that will turn things in your favour. As is normal for a roguelite, you get a choice of randomized upgrades within a run, and even if you do fail, there is a permanent upgrade tree to carry over power-ups into future runs, with the procedural generation probably resulting in near infinite replayability and thus look like value for money. And the best part is that this is releasing very soon, which cannot be said for Block Fortress 2, since this game was just announced in September 2024 with no confirmed release date as of yet, although with how good it looks, I sure hope it is sooner rather than later. The original Block Fortress seems to be an iOS exclusive title that self-described as Minecraft meets tower defense, which appears to be exactly what they are going for here, adding a third-person camera in this sequel, but also adds in a dose of Helldivers and a fantasy theme. So you are shooting at orcs with rifles and turrets, which doesn't seem quite fair, but hey, they do have overwhelming numbers, with this also having a base building element as you construct your fortress block by block. Speaking of orcs, I want to mention Orcs Must Die Death Trap as well, which has just released as of the time of recording, so not exactly an upcoming game, so do forgive me, but this is the next entry in the long-running third-person action tower defense franchise, which differentiated itself from the pack back in the day by having a focus on traps rather than towers. But in this new entry, the main thing is that this is now an endlessly replayable roguelite instead of a level-based title, to the chagrin of many longtime fans of the genre. One Steam review even said that if you went in thinking it was Orcs Must Die 4, then you would be disappointed, but if seen through another lens as a spin-off, then there might be something to this game. While it isn't an early access release, the developers have been listening to player feedback and tweaking the game as needed. For example, with the number of barricades you have as a solo player versus in 4-player co-op. So let's see where this will finally land, with each War Mage playable character having special abilities and weapons along with permanent upgrades, so it does look like fun with friends, but maybe not so for solo players who might want to keep an eye on Nordhold instead, a city builder plus tower defense title where the tower defense part occurs outside and leading up to your city gates. This of course adds more strategy to the genre, since what you build in the city matters, along with your choices and decisions on random events, having to balance between economic growth and defensive prowess, which then feeds into the hex grid-based tower defense section. There are 8 towers in this game, but we'll have 100 plus custom upgrades available to choose from, with heroes and generals also adding to the replayability of this game with a neat fantasy theme similar to that of Gnomes, a title which is minimalist in presentation and has you controlling gnomes tending to their garden who have to fight off waves of goblins. Every in-game day, the map expands to reveal more of the goblin territory, which of course reveals new dangers as well as opportunities on how to build, all as you defend your crops in order to survive. The main factors in this game are the plants, relics and tools at your disposal, which will have unique interactions between each other with procedurally generated maps and biomes to ensure that every run is unique, with an impressive visual style even if it is not for everyone, where if you're into fancy modern visuals, something like Warden's Rising might be more your speed, being a base defense action RPG with a tower defense element, since you are protecting the core of your base while blasting away at thousands of enemies. This does remind me of the Rift Breaker, where games like this kind of veer away from the pure tower defense experience into base defense, but again, since there aren't that many of them, I have put it here for now. You play as a warden, tasked with saving humanity and attaining glory in the process, having to plan and build defenses before each mission commences, to use turrets, portals, walls and more, mixed in with real-time action with special abilities from your hero, so there is some MOBA DNA in this game as well, where you can also jump into a mech suit that just looks awesome. This will have 24 handcrafted campaign maps and 12 more challenging mission mode maps, and simply looks very well made, as is Hostile Mars, a sci-fi entry set on the Red Planet, where you are blasting away at thousands of enemy drones and robots, mixing in a building element not of the city builder but the factory builder instead. What this means is that there are elements of satisfactory in this game as you build up the economic back end and automate it to get the resources needed to build your defenses, which need to be on point since the enemy swarms really are quite large in this game. There are additional systems like the ability to salvage defeated enemies for scrap, as well as impressive looking upgrades for your turrets with way too many barrels in the final form, along with base building considerations like traps and elevation. The trailer does show off a mining animation, so there is some crafting sandbox style gameplay here as well, where I'm curious about the fail state in this game of what happens when the core of your base gets destroyed, since having to rebuild the entire massive factory could be a pain in the butt. And while this has been in development for a long time, the last update from the developer was on 1st January 2025, so it is not a dead game by any means, where you can look at Dawn of Defense in the meantime, since this is one of the more promising roguelite tower defense titles in development. This is a classic medieval fantasy title in which your tribe is the last bastion against the Empire, a more powerful military force that has taken over and corrupted the lands of your ancestors. You have to protect the Spirit Tower, earning the favour of the gods, and to use powerful runes to free the land from the Empire's grasps. You are building catapults, ballista and more, so fairly standard medieval towers and weaponry, but can also train troops to directly engage with the enemy in RTS style combat. The level layout is also interesting, with several islands linked by wooden bridges, with the valleys below them forming the lanes in which enemy units need to march through, also having base building and RPG elements, as well as the unlocking of powerful rune stones from run to run, and simply looks fantastic. But you should not judge games based solely on their cover, since the admittedly more grungy looking Dungeon Warfare 3 is of note as well, the sequel to games from 2015 and 2018, both of which have been very well received, and this looks to continue that trend as well. Like Traptile mentioned earlier, this series is not so much about towers but rather traps instead, from moving walls to arrow traps, flame traps, Tesla traps and more, where creating the perfect kill box can be so satisfying when it takes out a horde of enemies. Again, while it doesn't look super impressive, this should be great and has a 2025 release window, and speaking of which, I guess it's lucky for this developer that I decided to make this, since at the time of recording, as of 12 hours ago, the developer just switched their release date to tomorrow, which is something that indie developers should never do, since it doesn't give anyone any heads up that their game is releasing this week, where Defender's Quest 2 Mists of Ruin is the sequel to Defender's Quest Valley of the Forgotten, a once upon a time Flash game which I have a lot of reverence for, where the RPG nature of the character towers in this game is neat and does have a proper narrative. So here's hoping that this helps. Watch this video for upcoming RTS titles instead.